Chapter 5. Taiko Binta, a Splendid Game. The following day, the 60 new recruits from all 4 barracks were assembled for our first morning formation, and the pig delivered a lecture. Gravely he intoned, "We are now entering the first day of your training, and henceforth I want you men to regard me as your older brother. If you have any questions, requests, or problems, I sincerely hope that you will bring them to me. That is why I am here." I could literally feel the sense of wonderment. Was this actually the same man we had encountered the night before? Was it possible that our punishment had merely been some kind of initiation, and that now we would be treated humanely, with kindness and respect? There was an undeniable dignity about the man now, an understanding that engendered hope and relief. Somehow, he even looked better. At the moment I only wanted to like the pig, and even felt ashamed that he had been dubbed with such a name. I wanted devoutly to deserve his respect. "Now I know," he continued, "you have all heard that Air Force training is an unpleasant experience, and at times that may be the case. Nevertheless," he raised an admonitory finger, "it need not be so, not if you simply do as you are told. Not if you learn obedience, which, next to courage, is the most important of all virtues." He paused lengthily, strolling back and forth before us, hands clasped behind his back. "And why is obedience so essential?" Still pacing, consulting the sky, one eye squinted. "Because successful followership is indispensable to leadership, and because both are indispensable to victory." For a moment he regarded us speculatively. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Honourable Hancho Dono," we shouted. All 60 of us had learned quickly that it was vital to respond to such questions instantly and with great enthusiasm, that it was indeed impossible to respond too loudly or swiftly. "Good." The pig nodded to himself. "And that is why we begin with the little things. If men cannot learn obedience in small matters, how can they learn them in big ones? In the grand way of heaven and earth?" Yes, I thought, that makes good sense, completely logical. Shortly thereafter he concluded his lecture. "The time has now come for you to put aside childish things. The time has come for you to become men." Almost providentially, it seemed, a dozen bombers were passing over in V formations of 3 planes each, and for a few seconds their roar was all-consuming. "And as men," his words came in their aftermath, "you will soon carry the weight of your country, the weight of the world, upon your shoulders, far sooner than you can possibly realize at this stage. That is why, among other things, you must learn to follow instructions implicitly, instantaneously, without faltering. Do not worry about the reasons for any instruction, no matter how strange it may seem. All instructions are given because they are correct. We are the head of the body. You are the arms and legs, the hands and the feet. Do you grasp my meaning?" "Yes, Honourable Hancho Dono." His eyes narrowed, searching each man's countenance knowingly. "As for last night?" We held our breath. "You were given clear and careful instructions regarding neatness in the barracks, correct?" "Yes, Honourable Hancho Dono." A rhetorical question perhaps, that last, but we were taking no chances. However, not one barracks complied properly. Thankfully, we were not alone in our dereliction. In one barracks a shoe was missing, in another a locker was not tightly closed. In still another, there was dust on a window ledge, and so forth. If further infractions of this sort occur, we shall be compelled to give you some real punishment. The pig glanced knowingly at the other 2 Hancho, his assistants. "What you received last night was nothing at all. You were not harmed in the least, merely educated. However, by the time you have completed your training under Hancho Noguchi, you will be able to withstand anything. You will be able to enjoy having an insignificant ball bat laid across your rears. You will have joy and laughter in your hearts. Hancho Noguchi will make men of you." Thus ended our first inspirational lecture in the military, one of many more to come. That morning, and each one thenceforth, we arose at 6 for the formation 10 minutes later. Then came 30 minutes of calisthenics and running before chow. Our diet was healthy, though hardly fancy, consisting mainly of rice and bean soup, brought from the base kitchen to our quarters in large wooden buckets. Our utensils were limited to bowls and chopsticks. Following chow, we were briefed by the officer of the day, a tall, cadaverous individual whose face was patched with scar tissue, apparently the result of third-degree burns. Then we were given further instructions from the pig. Except for our noon meal, the remaining time was spent in class instruction, more calisthenics, combat training and glider practice. From 4 until 6 p.m, we cleaned and scrubbed our barracks and shaped up our clothing and combat gear for the dreaded and inevitable nightly inspection. We were also required to clean the quarters of our hancho, and each day 3 men were selected to wash and iron their clothes. Perfection of performance in all these areas was, of course, critical. At 9 p.m. came final formation and roll call. Shortly thereafter, we were in our cots, all lights out. Yes, lights out at 9, but it was then that the Shuban Kashikan made their appearance, and it was a rare night that they didn't find something amiss, regardless of our most assiduous efforts to keep the barracks in a state of perfection. A few nights after our first acquaintance with the ball bats, for example, we learned another fascinating game called Taiko Binta, all, allegedly, because one trainee had removed another's shoe brush from its proper place. Again, we were herded out into the cold with cuffs, kicks, and considerable ranting, clad in only our fundoshi. For some time the pig merely leered at us, clearly a master of the suspenseful pause and dramatic effect. "So," he said at length, attenuating the word with immense profundity. "So, my little darlings, you failed to heed our warnings." Then, abruptly, "You there!" He pointed an accusing finger. "Stand at attention!" He struck an idiotic pose, slumping, belly distended, arms dangling ape-like. A few of us grinned uncertainly as our friend adopted other weird poses. Pointing at various recruits, he would caricature their expressions, tilting his nose upward, gawking as though struck dumb with amazement, bulging his eyeballs and staring fixedly ahead in mock terror. Under happier circumstances, the pig would have been quite a comedian. Indeed, by now I was incessantly astonished at his versatility, a man of multiple personalities, each of which he apparently relished to the full. Only minutes after such preliminaries, in fact, he introduced us to our next experience in sadistic punishment. "So now, tonight," the pig held up his forefinger, "tonight we shall all participate in a game which may be a bit new for some of you." Again the pause as his glance somehow took in our own, all 60 men, in a single, knowing sweep. But consider how dull life would become without new experiences. So, yes, a pleasant little game, really. Taiko Binta, a new experience. His assistants grinned knowingly, almost simpering. Then the climate changed dramatically. "First rank, about face," he bellowed, and we promptly did as commanded. "Third rank, about face." Now ranks 1 and 2 were facing each other, as were ranks 3 and 4. Then, approaching the recruit in rank 1, the pig ordered the man facing him to step aside, taking his place. "Now," he purred, staring his hapless opponent in the face. "We are adversaries, correct?" No reply. "Correct." The recruit gulped, offering a dazed, convulsive nod. His face was ashen. "Very good. He's not deaf. He's only dumb. So now, the object of our little game is simply this." Swift as a ferret, the pig struck, and the boy fell to the ground with a moan, clutching his face. A murmur flowed through the ranks. "Silence," the pig bellowed. "Now, as you can readily see, the game is very simple. The object is merely to alternate blows, give and take. Unfortunately, my teammate is a poor player. Look." He pointed as though dumbfounded. "He has collapsed like a puny girl. So much as I hate to do so, I must withdraw from the game." His so-called opponent was still lying on the ground in a fetal position, and the pig leaned down solicitously, helping him to his feet. Then he turned to the man he had replaced. "You will kindly assist our fallen hero to the sidelines." The man responded very promptly. "As you can see," the pig intoned, "Taiko Binta is a wonderfully simple game. Even a hopeless imbecile can participate. It is also highly reciprocal. We simply alternate blows to the face. Ranks 1 and 3 will have the honour of being first. Then ranks 2 and 4 may repay the compliment." A shrill little giggle, much like a sob, escaped his lips. "Now, on the count of 3, first and third ranks strike on cadence. Ichi, ni, san, strike." The response was feeble and uncoordinated. I was in the 4th rank, and the punches from my opponent were quite soft and painless. "On cadence!" the pig shouted. "And much harder! Left, right, left, right, left, right! Harder, harder! Ha! You hit like dying butterflies! Put some energy into it, or I will have to give you a better demonstration." Gradually the force of the blows increased. One caught me on the lower lip, mashing it against my teeth, another in my eye. It throbbed, blurring, and began to water profusely. As the pain increased, those on the receiving end began shifting slightly, ducking at times instinctively. This gave the Hancho an excuse, however, to move in with the bats, striking their victims across the back. Unfortunately, rank 4 was the most accessible and took the brunt of it, but the pig was not satisfied. "Ha! You Hancho hit like butterflies yourselves, butterflies that someone has pissed on. Give me that bat, Kakuda." Chuckling, but still counting out cadence, he scuttled along behind us, delivering short, chopping blows to our calves. Knocked off balance, I lurched forward, causing my opponent's punch to land much harder than he intended. It caught me solidly in the nose, and my whole face went numb, nostrils gushing blood. My eyes were blinded with tears, and I could feel the blood trickling down my throat. Then, at last, it was time to alternate, and I began with only light blows, partly because I could scarcely see, partly because I didn't wish to harm my opponent. Immediately, though, a sharp-eyed Hancho began whacking my thighs. Instinctively I threw one hand back and received a numbing blow on the elbow. A hand grabbed my neck, fingernails nearly penetrating the skin. "Now, smart ass," he snarled, "let me see you draw some blood." Despite my heightened emotions, I was struck by the irony of that statement, since my own blood was still flowing copiously, dripping off my chin onto my chest. I stared at the face across from me, blinking. It was a strong, handsome face, but the eyes were furtive, even a little dangerous, like those of a trapped animal. I can't," I stammered. The words were unexpected, completely involuntary. "What? What did you say?" My taskmaster sounded incredulous. "We'll see about that." I felt a searing pain across my rear, and then he began to kick me directly in the anus. I whirled, consumed in pain and rage, wanting nothing more in all of existence than to kill him, to ensure his utter annihilation. My fighting spirit was short-lived, however, and he drubbed me right and left with the bat until I fell, grovelling. "Next time, you little piece of shit," he puffed. "Next time I'll knock your putrid head off." Then he yanked me to my feet and delivered another kick. "Now, do you still want to fight?" I shook my head, vocal cords nearly paralysed. "Then get back in line and start punching." My body was burning, racked with pain, as the boy across from me urged, "Come on, hit me, I can take it." My knuckles struck his cheek solidly. "Harder," the Hancho growled, striking me across the back, and I continued to punch with increasing force. At last, the pig called it to a halt. "So now, you recruits, you are becoming acquainted with Taiko Binta, a splendid game, correct?" "What? You don't think so?" He sounded distressed. "Hi, Honourable Honcho Dono." What was that? He cupped one ear with his hand, and we repeated the words more loudly, though obviously without sufficient enthusiasm. Well, you probably just need a little more practice, he replied, feigning much empathy and kindness. Then you can write home and tell your families what great fun you are having in basic training. Chapter 6. The Grand Way of Heaven and Earth. Afterward, all of us lay in our barracks, sick in body and heart, trying to smother our groans. 2 or 3 men staggered out the door to vomit. My head throbbed, my nose and sinus area still numb. The floor seemed to rock like that of a ship in mild swells as I lay there face down trying to comprehend what had happened. My entire body was bruised and aching. Life was a mass of misery and confusion. Suddenly I started. Someone had touched me. "Don't be afraid," a voice whispered. "What?" I blurted. "Quiet! It's only me, Nakamura." He was standing there beside my cot, a faint shaft of light from outside revealing his face and bare shoulders, taller than I and well built with a rather bad complexion. "Ah, so," I responded. "The one who—" I turned on my side, massaging my battered elbow, not knowing what to say. "Well?" I mumbled uncertainly. "Please sit down." The pain shot through my legs, even though I had barely shifted them. "No thanks," he replied, rubbing his hip gingerly with one hand. "My arse still hurts from that first night." He was actually grinning a little. "I just wanted to tell you, I'm sorry about hitting you so hard, especially that one time right in the nose." "It wasn't your fault," I said. "It was mine. I mean, it was that stinking Huncho." I almost whispered the last 2 words. He hit me on the back of my legs and knocked me off balance. "Yes," Nakamura said, "and you got beaten up more than anybody else." Oddly enough, I felt a little surge of pride, but made no reply. "Those rotten bastards," he added. "You know, somebody's going to kill those bastards some day, every last one of them. Kill them all, smash their stinking heads in." "I hope so," I said, but wanted him to leave. The pain was coming in waves, and it took all my strength to suppress the groaning. Eventually the tension became unbearable, and I struggled to sit up. "Well," I grunted, "I'm sorry that I had to hit you so hard. I hit you pretty hard, and I hope you'll forgive me because I really hated to. I definitely didn't want." At that point, I actually didn't care much what I said, or what I had done. Anything simply to ease the pain, and the words fell out in a meaningless jumble. But Nakamura just stood there, and inwardly I began to berate him. I closed my eyes, bit my lips, clenched and unclenched my hands. Why didn't the idiot leave? Couldn't he see what hell I was undergoing? He hadn't been hurt half as badly as I, nor had anyone else. "You'd better not let the Shubankashikan find you up," I said, and hated myself. We both knew they probably wouldn't be back again until morning. "Hi," he nodded. "I guess you're right." Yet still, he remained there. Maybe, I decided, he felt sorry for me, wanted to lend some kind of moral support. Gradually, however, I discovered that by tightening all the muscles in my body, then relaxing them, I could ease the pain. Tighten muscles and inhale. Relax muscles and exhale. Steadily, rhythmically, over and over. Yes, a good system, and it actually worked. I was beginning to feel better. I glanced at Nakamura, suddenly sensing his loneliness. That was why he wouldn't leave. "So, where are you from?" I asked. "Kur," he answered. "You know," he confided, "I always knew this would be rough, but I never thought anybody could be as rotten as these dirty. They're all sadists, you know that?" "Definitely," I said. "How do you think they pick them? They go out and look all around the country. Whenever they see someone whipping his mother or kicking his little sister in the belly, they say, 'Come on, we've got a great job for you, Hancho at Hero Air Base.'" "Right, and that's not all," Nakamura said. "Every one of them is queer as fish in the desert." I laughed, despite myself, then became serious. Really? I was very naive in such matters, but ready to believe almost anything by now. Just wait, Nakamura warned. You'll find out soon enough. My brother's in the army. He told me all about it. And that stinking pig. You can tell he's a pervert just looking at him. He's also a complete maniac. Absolutely, I said. Do you think they have it as tough in the army as we do? I could still barely force out the words. My brother's in the army too. I doubt it, Nakamura replied. Maybe, though. Some of those forced marches they go on probably take a lot of guts, a lot of endurance. They take their beatings too, so maybe there's not much difference in the end. The pain had eased now that I was concentrating on something else, supplanted by the need for sleep. I wondered how Nakamura could remain standing there so long. On the other hand, he continued, we probably don't have it as rough as those Navy pilots do. The ones that make it through basic training in the Navy Air Force, they're real tigers, believe me. Nothing can stop them. How could anybody have it worse than we do? I wondered and drifted into a death-like sleep while Nakamura was still talking. When I awakened, it was 6 a.m. I groaned, feeling, remembering, as the awfulness of our situation asserted itself. Momentarily, it was impossible to believe that I was away from home, that Hero was now my reality. The others were stirring, and reveille had just sounded. The groans became general as the badly cropped heads emerged from the blankets. Yes, it was all real enough, and for an instant I closed my eyes, praying, striving with all my power to will it otherwise. For a flickering instant, I was home, there in my own special room, warm and secure, Mother and Tomika preparing breakfast. The vision shattered as Kakuda and Sakigawa, the snake, clumped into the barracks, shouting and slamming doors, cuffing and kicking the slow risers, even dumping some of them from their cots onto the floor. One recruit landed with a thud in a tangle of blankets. It was Nakamura. I had to rise, fast, but suddenly could not move. My legs were like wood, refusing to bend, and I felt a wild spasm of terror. My right arm throbbed at the elbow and seemed completely paralyzed. With a violent wrench, I rolled from my cot, the pain coming like splinters of glass as I struck the floor. But the shock brought life to my limbs, and somehow I made it to my feet. Hobbling and limping into my pants and shirt, I vaguely realized that my face and chest were still caked with dried blood. Frantically, I laced my boots, fully expecting more punishment as the snake approached, but he passed by, apparently distracted by someone else, shouting, "Get a move on!" Beds made in record time, we rushed to the first formation, grunting and grimacing at every step. We fell into our ranks, staring rigidly ahead, but every man had welts and sores. Glancing about once or twice, I saw swollen faces, black and blue marks. "Eyes straight ahead," Kakuda bellowed, but the pig was smiling with great beneficence as he surveyed us. "Stiff?" he inquired. "Sore?" His eyebrows vaulted toward his hairline in mock disbelief. "Ah, what a pity." He shook his head, staring at the earth, then glanced up. Now his expression was stern, solemn, even noble like that of a samurai. "You have no stamina. Japan's valiant sons. How disappointing, how distressing." "Well," he stroked his jaw, "perhaps 20 or 30 minutes of running will at least limber you up a little." He glanced at the other Hancho. "Naturally, we would enjoy running along with you, but as you know, we Hancho are sadly discriminated against." Casting his eyes downward long-sufferingly, he added, "We are forced to ride bicycles." Then, having us form single file, he commanded, "Forward march!" Every step was torture. We moved like crippled old men. "Terrible, terrible!" our Hancho shouted. "Since you don't know how to walk, we must try running. Double time, march!" Something cracked, and the rear man blundered forward, crashing into the one ahead. Slowly, achingly, our column moved out, like a row of lame ducks. As we hobbled down the airstrip, our glorious friend and mentor circled on his bicycle, alternately screeching, cursing, cackling and cracking jokes, periodically flailing us with a length of bamboo. Within a mile, some of the men were straggling badly. One of them had fallen to the rear some distance. Glancing behind, the pig caught sight of him and circled back full speed. As we reached the far end of the strip and headed the opposite direction, the man was down, and the pig was flailing him with his rod. His efforts were fruitless, however, for his victim had fainted. As the grind continued, others dropped out. One stumbled, pitching to the concrete. 2 comrades helped him to his feet, but his legs collapsed, feet dragging as they bore him forward. It was impossible, of course, for them to keep up, and shortly the pig returned to flog all 3 of them. Having finished, he sped down the entire line, thrashing at us wildly. "This is how a fighter plane attacks," he yelped. "Fast, unexpected, deadly." Synchronizing his blows with each word, he powered forward steadily, striking at each man's head with his rod. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Fortunately, his aim wasn't always accurate. I felt the stick glanced off my shoulder, and an instant later, intent on his role as a fighter pilot, the pig ran into one man and pitched over with a magnificent crash. "You clumsy idiot!" he squawked. How I rejoiced! Our vainglorious and intrepid fighter pilot had just been shot down. As the run became more grueling, men began collapsing one after another until there were only a few of us left, but the pig had disappeared, apparently having sustained a few well-deserved bruises of his own. It was our friend the snake who eventually brought the ordeal to a halt. All of us were panting and gasping in great distress, but I had to admit a lot of my stiffness was gone. Our formation was badly decimated, pitifully sagging. The snake, however, apparently decided to exercise compassion. Nothing like a brisk walk before breakfast, right? His smile was almost kindly. Fall out for chow. It was the beginning of an eventful day. Following our noon meal, Kakuda introduced us to more games, the last of which involved squirming along on our bellies beneath our cots, around and around the barracks. This because the floor was allegedly dirtier than a pig pen. I squirmed my way forward in abject misery, eyes upon the man's boots just ahead. Contact with the floor had drugged me, and I was overwhelmed with the urge to sleep. The desire welled in a great languorous whirl, and a voice shouted, "Move it! Move it!" I flinched, blinking, and nearly rammed my face into the flailing heels of the man ahead. Afterward, Kakuda departed, and the KPs brought our chow in the usual wooden buckets. Ravenously, I attacked my bowl of rice, feeling my face throb and ache with each chew. "Hello, Kuwahara, old friend," a voice said. I glanced up, startled. It was Nakamura. "Hello," I replied. "Please sit down." Nothing but a stereotypical greeting, and we were too hungry to converse much, but it was good to have a comrade. Nakamura had been among those who had not succumbed out during our brisk walk that morning. "That rotten son of a bitch," he said quietly. "He really looks like a pig. Got some of his own medicine this morning, though, didn't he?" "Hi," I agreed. "Came down right on his stupid head." "He really did," Nakamura said. "Maybe it will knock some sense into him." "Not likely," I laughed. Neither of us had actually witnessed the pig's great downfall, merely heard it, but it was gratifying to imagine that he had landed on his head. Before long, in fact, several men were gleefully repeating our assertion that it had occurred in that manner. "You wait," Nakamura assured me. "That fat-faced idiot will really get it one of these times. Some dark night." "He'll be getting it, all right," I concurred. Again, only wishful thinking, but it was enjoyable. Merely reflecting upon such possibilities and knowing that others were doing the same provided a sense of camaraderie and lifted our spirits. Initially, we had been alone and highly reticent, but as brothers in suffering we rapidly became friendly. Having someone to commiserate with, someone to hate with, was very therapeutic. Following our brief noon-hour respite, however, we were back at it, learning more games. Upon failing to perform our calisthenics acceptably, we were forced to lie on our sides, then raise ourselves off the ground, balancing on one hand and foot with the opposite limbs extended upward at 45 degrees. An interesting experiment and rather easily performed at first, but with each passing second it became more difficult. Time after time we strove to balance ourselves in that absurd position, forming X's with our bodies, feeling our arms quiver and shake, more every second, then losing our balance and collapsing. All this, of course, accompanied by threats, commands, cuffs, kicks, and raucous laughter from our taskmasters. Within half an hour we were lying on the floor almost paralysed. By now the snake and Kakuda had introduced a new element, whips, and once I felt the lash across my quivering back, a flick along my neck that burned like acid, but I merely cringed, huddled there helplessly trying to protect my face with my hand. Other, equally innovative forms of punishment followed, and that night at final formation the pig was back at the helm, bringing the day's activities to a fitting climax. I noted with satisfaction a bruise on one side of his forehead, and the fact that his left arm appeared rather stiff, but my pleasure was short-lived, for we had failed to recite the 5 main points of the imperial rescript to soldiers and sailors. This rescript was issued by the Emperor Meiji in 1882 and was regarded as sacred, a document several pages long which every military man had to learn verbatim. All were required to absorb its complex rules and philosophy through continual study and meditation, to memorize, also recite it completely or in part at a moment's notice. Sometimes Japanese fighting men had to recite the rescript in full at each night's formation, the chanting going on for about 15 minutes. Fortunately, we at Hero were only held accountable for the 5 main points or precepts as follows. The soldier and sailor should consider loyalty the essential duty. A soldier or a sailor in whom the spirit is not strong, however, skilled in art or proficient in science, is a mere puppet, and a body of soldiers or sailors wanting in loyalty, however well ordered and disciplined it may be, is in an emergency no better than a rabble. With single heart fulfill your essential duty of loyalty, and bear in mind that duty is weightier than a mountain, while death is lighter than a feather. Inferiors should regard the orders of their superiors as issuing directly from the emperor. Always pay due respect not only to your superiors, but also to your seniors, even though not serving under them. On the other hand, superiors should never treat their inferiors with contempt or arrogance. Except when official duty requires them to be strict and severe, superiors should treat their inferiors with consideration, making kindness their chief aim, so that all grades may unite in their service to the emperor. The soldier and sailor should esteem valour. Ever since the ancient times, valour has in our country been held in high esteem, and without it our subjects would be unworthy of their name. How then may the soldier and the sailor, whose profession it is to confront the enemy in battle, forget even for an instant to be valiant? Faithfulness and righteousness are ordinary duties of a man, but the soldier and sailor, in particular, cannot be without them and remain in the ranks even for a day. Faithfulness implies the keeping of one's word, and righteousness the fulfillment of one's duty. If then you wish to be faithful and righteous in anything, you must carefully consider at the onset whether you can accomplish it or not. If you thoughtlessly agree to do something that is vague in its nature, bind yourself to unwise obligations, and then try to prove yourself faithful and righteous, you may find yourself in dire straits from which there is no escape. The soldier and the sailor should make simplicity their aim. If you do not make simplicity your aim, you will become effeminate and frivolous, and acquire fondness for luxurious and extravagant ways. You will grow selfish and sordid, and sink to the last degree of baseness, so that neither loyalty nor valour will avail to save you from the contempt of the world. Never do you, soldiers and sailors, make light of this injunction. These precepts were termed the grand way of heaven and earth, the universal law of humanity, and men who made a single mistake in their recitation have sometimes killed themselves. Thus it was understandable that the pig laid such stress upon this aspect of our training, for it was supposedly that very soul of soldiers and sailors, and of course of our airmen. Simultaneously, it seemed a bit ironic that he and his cohorts should have such a curious way of complying with the injunction about treating inferiors with kindness and consideration. That night, because of our inability to memorize the requisite precepts with sufficient speed, we were lined up facing the barracks, and this time there were no ball bats. One by one our faces were slammed against the wall, resulting in several bloody broken noses, split lips, and loose teeth. "Recruits," the pig later informed us jovially, "this has been a most eventful day. A few more like it, and you will start to become men." Chapter 7. A Time to Cry. Within a single week, my entire life had been transformed beyond comprehension. My entire concept of man, of good and bad, of right and wrong. Yet ironically, I could no more evaluate my feelings rationally than a wounded man might evaluate pain. The initial trauma had produced a numbness, a kind of psychological paralysis, but emerging from it was an ever-increasing dread. It was utterly impossible to obey the rescript's injunction not to fear a superior when our superiors failed to observe the related injunction regarding respect and consideration. We had become as furtive as rats, frequently subjected to electric shock. We were constantly tensed and waiting for the next one. Within only 1 week, I had come to believe that life with my family, the days with my friends at school, were nothing but a childish illusion. How far off it all seemed now, how vague and insubstantial. Onomichi was only some 50 miles away, but it might as well have been thousands, at the most remote corner of the world. Time also was a relative thing. My youth was being purged away. A single week had made me old. Shinpei, Shinpei, Kutsu Migaki, Matanete Nakunokayo. These words have long been sung by Japanese recruits at Shotorapa after the long, hard day. Recruit, recruit, polish your shoes. Later you may cry in bed. The night has always been a time of sorrow for the trainee, a time when he could reminisce, take a deep breath, then under cover of darkness, release his pent-up emotions, the pain and the fear. Once the Shuban Kashikan had completed their inspection and the disciplinary action that usually followed, we lay in our cots thinking of home, especially of our mothers. After all, some of us were only 15. Possibly we even took a kind of perverse satisfaction in our very sorrow, as people sometimes do. Lacking others to sympathize with us, we sympathized with ourselves, and it was then that we shed tears, there in the darkness where no one could see and few could hear. Some of the recruits, like myself, had barely entered puberty, and our voices were still changing. In our dreams we sometimes called aloud for our mothers, but I never heard a single recruit call the name of his father. Later, in fact, I learned that dying men also asked for their mothers. The father is master of the family, and it is partly his stern and remote love that helps instill a son with the fighting spirit. Yet when comfort is needed, or when a man has little time left, he wants his mother. To one unfamiliar with the Japanese mind, some of our actions, our weeping and sentimentality, may appear strange. To the outsider, we are an inscrutable people who rarely exhibit emotion. And it is true, in fact, that we often maintain a facade. Ours is a philosophy of stoicism and resignation in many ways, and frequently we display no feeling, even when filled with joy or hate. Often we may even smile or laugh at adversity, but all people share the same passions. They are merely manifest differently according to one's culture and conditioning. Westerners, especially Americans in my view, may be compared emotionally speaking to boiling pots with loose lids from which steam escapes fairly regularly and with relative ease. Orientals, certainly the Japanese on the other hand, are more like pressure cookers. The same heat is applied and the same steam exists, but in the latter instance the steam often builds for some time without any outward manifestation. When at last it breaks forth, however, it may do so with remarkable violence. The analogy has its limitations, of course. In many cases, for example, Japanese can minimize or eliminate much of the emotional steam because of religious and philosophical conditioning that fosters acceptance and resignation, a proclivity for bending with the wind like resilient bamboo which can withstand great storm without being uprooted. Nevertheless, it is no exaggeration to say that Japanese people in general can be the epitome of serenity, of politeness to the point of toadishness in their deference to others on many occasions, that in others they can respond to great emotional duress with hysteria. It is not uncommon, for instance, for Japanese women who have lost a loved one to fling themselves upon the floor in a spirit of inconsolable wailing. Moreover, it's certainly common for Japanese military men to assault the enemy with implacable determination, indeed, utter fanaticism. Such considerations aside, every effort was made by our Hancho to stifle all emotionalism, except as it pertained to country and emperor. Constantly, inexorably, all emotion was funneled into the great crucible of patriotism. Ideally, every fear, anxiety, hope and joy was to be subdued, transformed, and channeled into the fighting spirit, the spirit of the Yamato race, of the samurai. Consequently, whimpering because of pain or crying for one's mother were not only evidence of degrading weakness, they were indications that our lives had not been consecrated. We had yet to comprehend fully the doctrine of individual expendability. To acquire that unwavering testimony called for in the imperial rescript, that duty was indeed weightier than the mountains, that death was lighter than a feather. If a single recruit was overheard moaning in his sleep, we were all punished. At night we were constantly rousted from bed for our audience with the pig. Sometimes he was the ultimate comedian, sometimes quite the opposite. The smirk would be gone, the flaccid face contorted, or in some cases extremely glum and weary. Frequently he would pace back and forth before us, hands clasped behind his back, head bowed, lips pursed, studiously perusing the earth beneath his feet, or unpredictably casting a glance at the night sky. Then, at length, he would deign to acknowledge our presence. "Can it be? Can it truly be?" he would mutter with immense solemnity and incredulity. "That's such pitiful specimens of humanity, such helpless and hopeless boobs, such miserable excuses of manhood, are soon to be honoured sons of the great Nippon Empire, privileged to defend the glory of our most esteemed emperor?" Shaking his head grievously, "The very thought fills our souls with untold trepidation." Nakamura was standing next to me at the time. "It fills his fat ass with trepidation." The faintest whisper. "With a ton of shit." His lips were barely parted and scarcely moved. I was actually shocked at such sacrilege, but I also struggled to keep from smiling. "Nevertheless," our mentor continued, "the grand designs of heaven and earth shall never be frustrated. Never, 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 even in the most infinitesimal manner, even within the mind of a wretched flea." The pig paused for at least a full minute, scrutinizing our faces with much severity. "So now, Shinpei?" His tone clearly signalled that the oration was over. "I am going to give you some fatherly advice, especially those who bawl their lungs out every night like snot-nosed babies. You are here at Hero Air Base for only one reason." Another lengthy pause. "Do you know what that reason is?" "High Honourable Hancho Dono," we chorused the words loudly. "Do you?" "High Honourable Hancho Dono." This time we all bellowed from the depths of our bellies. The pig shook his head, slowly, emphatically, in a spirit of resignation. "No, you do not, but you will learn. Before the end of your training under Sergeant Noguchi, there will be no question." The pacing increased. "At present, however, you must learn one thing." For a time he frowned at his feet as if they were melting, Waiting so long, I decided that he had lost his trend of thought. Maybe there was something wrong with his brain. Then, with a great surge of energy, "There is no past." His words were so loud, so unexpected, so formidable, that many of us literally quaked. At that point he actually turned his back upon us, surveying the stars. "There is no past." More subdued now, but equally irrefutable. "Only the present and the future." Eventually he turned to face us again, and now almost gently, as though confronted with some cosmic sorrow. "You must forget about everything except those concepts we are authorized to teach you. Forget about civilian life, forget about your mothers, forget about your families. Live instead for the Emperor and country without the slightest equivocation. If you do so, all fear will distill like frost in the morning sun, and you will attain liberation. You will attain joy and strength and freedom, like that of the eagles." Even more softly, "So now, the binter, the ball bats and other things, they are nothing at all in and of themselves. They exist only to the extent that they help us to make men of you." His glance was fierce and probing, utterly uncompromising. "Do you understand?" "Hi, Honorable Hancho Dono," we roared. For a moment the pig almost smiled. "That is good, and now comes the proof." He motioned to the ever-vigilant Sakigawa and Kakuda. "Bring forth the bats." That night many of us were beaten unconscious, but no one uttered a sound. Strangely, although the majority of us were very young, there were a few recruits at Hero anywhere from 45 to 60 years old. Stranger still, those individuals were treated with no more consideration than anyone else. Basic training was an enormous melting pot, wherein each man was deprived of his identity as fully as possible. Every man's head was barbarously cropped. Every man wore the same ugly, swamp-coloured uniform. The elderly, even people of wealth and prestige in a few cases, were all treated just like the rest of us. The Hancho, who would have bowed in obeisance to some of the trainees in civilian life, or who might never have been able to associate with them, was tyrant and ruler over all. He could kick, strike, bully, and humiliate any recruit with impunity. Even murder in some instances. Despite our anxiety, however, after the first few days at Hero, we slept as though drugged. Our bodies had not yet become conditioned to the arduous training and the punishment. During the night, we lay in a near coma, and at times the Snake and Kakuda would enter the barracks with some of their cohorts to perform their clever tricks. On one occasion, they stealthily tied our hands and feet, then flashed on the lights, awakening us with wild shouts. Aroused from our stupor, we struggled from our beds, unaware of what had happened, and tumbled to the floor, groping about frantically to untie ourselves. This to the uproarious laughter of our tormentors. When Nakamura had first declared that many of our Hancho were perverted, I was startled and incredulous. By now, however, my outlook had changed radically. The Snake, especially, enjoyed humiliating the younger recruits in various degrading ways, and those of us who had barely entered puberty suffered most. During a formation, he would leer at some unfortunate who had made a mistake and say, "Hey, Shinpei, you still act like a kid. Nah." There was no helpful answer to such questions, because he would merely persist to the conclusion. "Hey, Shinpei, aren't you a man yet? Didn't you hear right? I asked if you are a man." "Yes, Honorable Hancho Dono." To this the Snake would feign great amazement. "Ah, so. Then prove it. Take down your pants. Now your fundoshi. Quick." Then the hapless trainee would stand shamefaced while the Snake, sometimes Kakuda and the pig as well, poked fun and made snide comments regarding his meagre endowments. Such things I actually dreaded more than the physical punishment. Late one night, 3 of us were rousted from bed to clean the Hancho's quarters, because our work there during the day had allegedly been unsatisfactory. Afterward, we were forced to strip down and leap into icy showers. The Snake then herded us out naked into the cold, demanding that we run around the barracks 10 times before consigning us to the shower room for the remainder of the night. There, for the first hour, we huddled on a wooden bench, cramped and shivering in total darkness. As the time dragged on, we decided to exercise. It was the only way we could keep from growing numb, perhaps freezing. Periodically, however, we succumbed to exhaustion, and once I awoke from a half-sleep to begin doing push-ups. In the midst of these exertions, feeling the cold knife upward through my feet and hands, I thought about the showers, a flash of optimism which died as quickly. So far as I knew, the hot water was turned on for only a short period each evening following our training. Eventually, however, having nothing else to do, I groped my way over to the showers and barely twisted one of the handles. A slight whoosh of cold water, and I jerked back. Then, as I reached out to turn it off, the water actually felt tepid, steadily growing warmer. Seconds later it was coming hot, steaming hot. Quickly I turned it off, glancing about furtively. Had our Hancho heard the noise, the sound of water running in the pipes from their rooms? I waited for some time and decided that by now they were snoring deeply, the sleep of the unjust. I peered through the dark at my companions, vague outlines, squatting back to back on the bench, dozing fitfully. For a moment I battled with myself. Possibly the hot water was a mere residue, a bit remaining from the evening before. If I alone were to shower, though, it might last for some time, if the three of us used the showers. After a moment I whispered, "Yai. Okay, Yamamoto, come over to the showers." "Hot water?" Oka blurted. "Quiet." Instantly they were next to me, rubbing their arms and bellies, hunching over, treading up and down. "Turn them on quick!" Yamamoto groaned through chattering teeth. "No, just one," I insisted. "We won't turn it on too high, or all the water will be gone before we can even get warm." Obediently, they stood aside while I regulated the shower. Then we crowded beneath it, back to back, exclaiming our delight in muted tones. "Ah, this is great," I murmured, tilting my head back. "This is fantastic." Then another idea struck. "I wonder if... Where's something to stop the drain?" "Sit on it," Oka replied gleefully. "Your rear is big enough." It might be possible. I decided to fill the small shower room 3 or 4 inches deep without flooding the rest of the floor. Suddenly I knew what to use. Toilet paper. And the plan worked perfectly. I covered the drain with a layer about 1/2 inch thick, and the water expanded across the floor around us, soaking through the paper just fast enough to prevent the outer room from flooding and to maintain a steady warmth. "Why don't you both admit I'm a genius?" I said, and settled back in the gurgling liquid. Eventually the shower created enough steam to also warm the surrounding atmosphere. I stretched supine in the deepening liquid. There, in the midst of all that cold, dark cruelty, we had found our secret place, and in that warm, beneficent seclusion we fell asleep. Chapter 8. The Cost of Sushi Cakes. Despite the constant behests to forget our past, after 2 weeks our families were permitted to pay us a brief visit. Only 14 days since I had said goodbye, and it seemed ages. As the visiting hour approached, I began to tremble. So much had happened. Home seemed years into the past, 1,000 miles away. At 4 p.m, I was waiting in the visiting room where a counter separated the trainees as if they were convicts from their families. I watched people enter, observed how each trainee's eyes lit in recognition. Some of them seemed almost embarrassed, strangely hesitant. The bar hampered them from the intimacies of a normal greeting, and the best they could do was clasp hands. 20 minutes passed. 30, and no sign of my own family. I was beginning to fret and fidget. Where were they? What could have possibly happened to them? Didn't they realize that we had only this one fleeting hour together? Maybe they wouldn't arrive until too late, if they arrived at all. Soon I was growing angry. If they never got to see me, it would serve them right. On the other hand, maybe they had misunderstood the visiting date. Maybe I had somehow written it down wrong in my letter. Yes, that was probably it. What a hopeless idiot. I cracked my knuckles and stared bleakly at the floor. Then, furtively, even superstitiously, I glanced toward the door. There, miraculously, was my father in his grey business suit, its conservative shade blending with the two drab wartime kimono behind him, Mother and Tomika. "Oh, my Yasuo, my Yasuo," Mother murmured. "We were caught in a terrible traffic jam." Simultaneously, Tomika was saying something about a bomb crater, but it barely registered. They were here. That was all that mattered. Now we were clasping hands, looking into each other's eyes. Mother and Tomika made no effort to disguise their feelings, and their tears glistened conspicuously despite the smiles. For a moment I couldn't speak because I was struggling to restrain tears of my own, actually biting my lower lip to avoid displaying any weakness, especially before my father. Father was even wearing one of his rare smiles. In fact, I had never seen it so warm. "How is your new life, my son?" he inquired. "Oh," I faltered. "It is fine, Father. Very—" I groped for the right words. "Very educational." But something writhed inside me, and the real words in my mind pounded. "Why do you lie? Tell the truth. Tell of the unbelievable brutality, the awful injustice. Tell him that you can't stand this place a day longer. Maybe he can do something." I knew full well, however, that my father had received similar treatment in the army. Surely he realized what I was going through. The thought spawned feelings of incredulity. How had he managed to survive so well? Survive at all? Father squinted one eye, raising the opposite brow as though reading each thought. "Do your Hancho love you? Are they kind and gentle like your mother and sister?" I groped for an appropriate reply, but he continued. "You look very well. Your face has even filled out a little from all the delicious food, right?" Truly my face had filled out, swollen from being slammed against the barracks and the previous night's binter. "It's not from—" I began, and caught myself. Father's eyes held mine, and his head gave an abrupt little shake of warning. "Are they treating you well, Yasuo?" he demanded. I forced a pallid smile. "Yes, thank you, Father, quite well." His expression remained stern, uncompromising. "I mean very well." "Good," he replied. "There is nothing like military discipline to bring out the best in a man." For a few seconds none of us spoke. Then Tomika bent forward, her brow wrinkled, gazing into my face as though it were a mirror. "How did you get all those cuts?" she asked, looking highly distressed. "Yasuo-chan, your eyes are black," Mother exclaimed. "You've been injured." It was that appealing tone of concern with which I had become so familiar, and again I battled inwardly. The childish part of me took comfort, wanted to be coddled, yet I also felt irritation. "They've been cruel to you, absolutely brutal." She spoke so loudly I flushed and glanced in chagrin at the people nearest us, but they were all absorbed in their own conversations. "And your nose is swollen." "Yasuo is all right," Father said. "But his eyes," Mother persisted. "His poor dear." "He is perfectly all right," Father said. This time his tone allowed no opposition. "It's nothing, Mother, nothing at all." My voice cracked embarrassingly, partly because it was still changing. I just ran into a tree branch." I held my hand over my eyes as though shading them from the sun, breathing jerkily in the silence. All the while my mother's hand pressed mine so warmly I could actually feel her pulse. At that moment I loved her more than at any time in my life, more than anything else in the world. Quietly, Father was saying, "My son can take care of himself. A few little bruises are inevitable. They are helping to make a man of him, a samurai." I looked up, massaging the lower half of my face with one hand to keep the muscles from twitching. Then I smiled, nodding. "Hi." That was all I could say. "Your sister and I have made some sushi cakes," Mother said. "Will they permit you to have them?" Both Mother and Tomika had concealed food under the cloth obi about their waists. Their sushi cakes had long been a favourite with me. "Well, we're not supposed to," I answered reluctantly. "But they'll never know anything about it, if you can just hand it to me without anyone seeing." Mother and Tomika both looked worried. "Did you bring the shirts and towels?" I asked. Mother nodded and placed a bundle tied in a red furoshiki on the counter. "Just put the cakes inside," I urged. "No one will ever find out." Reluctantly, very surreptitiously, Mother complied, but ironically, only moments later, there was a commotion. We glanced about, startled to see a hancho cuffing one of the trainees. "Beat me! Beat me!" his mother wailed. "It wasn't my son's fault. He didn't ask us to bring him anything. It's my fault." The cuffing wasn't severe, but it was mortifying to all of us, especially the trainee's family. Sunday was the one day in the week when we were supposed to receive decent treatment. This was to have been our brief interlude, this visitor's day in particular, a fleeting, precious moment in time when all could be serene. The hancho himself was only 18 or 19 with a long neck and shiny, arrogant face. He could easily have punished the recruit later. How I hated him, literally would have rejoiced to kill him. Mother and Tomika, of course, were now greatly alarmed, imploring me in hushed, urgent tones to return my contraband the instant it appeared safe to do so. For an instant I wavered. Then my fear gave way to rebellion. "No, those. You and Tomika made them for me, and I'm going to keep them." Both Mother and Tomika were still murmuring anxiously, their eyes haunted. "Let him have his sushi," Father muttered. "They cannot hurt a Kuwahara. Let him keep them." The matter was settled, and soon the visiting hour was over, our women again becoming tearful. "Stop that," Father ordered. Reaching across the counter, he clasped my arm. "We shall see you in a short while once your training is over, Hai?" I nodded. "We get 2 days' leave." "So you see," Father said. "He gets 2 days' leave. We will all have a splendid celebration and hear of his experiences. Meanwhile, Yasuo will make the most of his opportunity. He will make us all proud of him." His gaze coalesced with my own. "Make us proud of you, my son." I merely nodded, fearing that my voice might betray me. Seconds later they were leaving. Father strode out of the door without a backward glance. Mother followed, covering her mouth with one hand, but Tomika turned briefly, eyes large and limpid like those of a fawn. She waved and tried to smile, but the smile collapsed piteously. Then they were gone. Later in the barracks, most of us relaxed on our cots, a privilege accorded only on Sunday, and stared at the ceiling. The visit hadn't elevated our spirits greatly. Nakamura was hunched on the edge of his cot, chin in his hands. Strolling over, I stood eyeing him, but he failed to notice. Reluctant to intrude, I paced slowly about the room, then stopped by his cot once more. "Yai, Nakamura," I whispered. "You like sushi cakes?" Grinning faintly, he glanced up. "You have some too?" I nodded. "Yes, I've hidden them under my blankets." Still grinning, he patted a spot next to him by the foot of his cot. "Me too." Soon we discovered that nearly everyone had received food of one kind or another, cake, candy, or cookies. Oke and Yamamoto had secreted items in their shirts and were becoming a bit boisterous. "We'll all have a party," Oka exclaimed. "Tonight, after Shoto Rapper." The thought filled us all with glee, and there was much hearty laughter for the first time in 2 weeks. Unfortunately, our happy interlude was short-lived. Upon returning from our evening meal, one held in the chow hall on Sundays, we found our beds ransacked. Several of us were whispering nervously when the pig made an abrupt entrance. "Oh!" Oka exclaimed. The word had escaped his lips of its own accord. "Oh?" The pig raised his eyebrows. What do you mean, oh? Gently, very disarmingly, he laid a hand on Oka's shoulder. Is something wrong? Something missing? Oka stiffened. No, Honourable Hancho Dono. Well then, I'm afraid I don't understand. As usual, he was relishing the situation. Why, did you say, oh? Oka stammered incoherently. Very strange, most mysterious. The pig stroked his jowl and began his usual pacing back and forth. I simply don't understand this at all. Could it be that I'm not welcome here? Come now, gentlemen. I sense a strange restraint. What, oh what, is wrong? Nothing is wrong, Honourable Hancho Dono, Nakamura bravely volunteered. Ah, so. Suddenly the pig whirled, jabbing his finger at the tip of Yamamoto's nose. Why then is your bed all torn up? Yamamoto gagged. Very curious indeed, the pig muttered and struck a melodramatic stance, one hand on his hip, the other massaging his brow. I come here, he said slowly, hoping for a little courtesy and friendship, but instead, what do I get? Not one kind word, only coldness. I merely ask a simple, decent question, yet people barely speak to me. He flounced down on my cot, nearly collapsing it, gazing at me with a stricken expression. Then he buried his face in his hands, faking ridiculous sobs. Kuwahara, what can this all mean? I don't know, Honourable. I'm a stranger in my own family. Children. My children. Don't you even recognise your mother? Then he reverted to his weeping. An incredible performance, and several of us laughed nervously, but knew that it presaged something unpleasant. And indeed it did. Eventually, tiring of such antics, the pig informed us in a rather bored manner that we would have to be chastised for attempting to fool him. We were herded outside, and our faces were slammed against the barracks. By now, most of us had learned to take much of the force with the upper rounded area of our foreheads, acquiring some fine bumps and bruises in the process, but it helped minimise the number of broken noses and split lips. That particular treatment, however, was only a preliminary. Afterward, we were forced to crawl around the barracks with our combat boots tied together by the laces and dangling from our necks. In this manner we travelled down the halls to visit the Hancho in their various rooms. It was much like certain college initiation ceremonies, I suppose, though a bit more harsh than most. Each man was required to knock on one of the closed doors, entering, still upon his hands and knees, to apologise. I was one of those to have an audience with the pig himself. As I entered, he was seated under a bright light, no doubt for theatrical effect, legs crossed and an arm hooked over the back of his chair. He was also smoking a large cigar. Sighing and blowing a jet of smoke toward the light bulb above, he inquired, "Aren't you well enough fed here, Kuwahara?" "Yes, Honourable." "Then why did you bring food into your quarters, unhealthy food, in fact, when you knew perfectly well that it was forbidden?" I had never considered sushi cakes unhealthy, but perhaps he was referring to our group in general. It was scarcely a point for argument under the circumstances, however. "I am sorry, Honourable Hancho Dono." Rarely had I felt more contrite. It was abundantly clear now that I had committed a grievous sin. "Well, Kuwahara, look at me, not at the floor. I am afraid that sorry is not adequate." Meanwhile, he kept blowing billows of rancid cigar smoke into my face. When I began to gag from the effects, he asked, "What in the world's the matter with you? Are you ill? Do I disgust you?" I fumbled hopelessly for a reply, but he continued. "As I was saying, Kuwahara, we wouldn't accomplish much at this base. As a matter of fact, we'd actually lose the entire war if every man in the military could break the rules, then simply say, 'I'm sorry.' Do you understand what I'm getting at? Or have you already forgotten my inspirational lecture last week on the virtues of obedience?" "Yes, Honourable. No, Honourable Hancho Dono, I have not forgotten." "I devoutly hope so," he replied, rolling his eyes melodramatically. Under less threatening circumstances, in fact, his response would have seemed ludicrous. But in view of your temporary lapse of memory, I trust that you will appreciate my need to underscore the problem in this manner. He studied me thoughtfully, exhaling more cigar smoke. Besides, he added wearily, I resent not being invited to the party you were planning after Shoto Rappa. I was a recruit once myself, you know. He then kicked me in the face, nearly breaking my cheekbone, and called out pleasantly, Next, please. Thank you very much, Honourable Hancho Dono, I mumbled, and crawled blindly for the door, face numb, boots swinging.